Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're actually journeying back quite a way to the early 19th century.
That's right. Specifically, 1808, 1809, we're going to explore the region of Waziristan.
And we're doing this through a really fascinating lens, aren't we?
Yes, through Mountstuart Elphinstone's, an account of the Kingdom of Kabul. It gives us this incredible snapshot.
A snapshot from over 2 centuries ago. It's amazing to have that kind of perspective.
It really is. A glimpse into a very different world.
Absolutely. And this was sparked for us by a video we saw from the Salahuddin Sikander channel on YouTube.
Yeah, they share some excerpts from Elphinstone's work, which really got us thinking.
So our focus today is really digging into Elphinstone's observations.
Mm-hmm.
The manners, habits, the characteristics of the Waziri people.
And maybe we'll touch on the Jadrins, too, who he famously called the Germans of the East.
The Germans of the East. That's such a curious description. So geographically, where did Elphinstone actually place Waziristan?
Okay, so based on his account, it was north of the Shiraz country. There was a region south of them.
Right.
And it stretched northwards, maybe about 100 miles, up towards Sufi Ko. Those are the sort of lower hills separating areas like Kohat and Banu.
Gotcha.
And he also mentions that from around the latitude of Sirsa going north, basically towards where the Koram River starts, the Waziris shared the mountains with the Jadrins.
Shared them? How?
Well, he says the Jadrins were on the western side of the range, and the Waziris were on the eastern side.
Okay, so a defined split there. Now, the land itself, Elphinstone describes it how? It sounds rugged.
Very rugged. Mostly mountains, covered in quite significant pine forests.
Pine forests, okay.
But with spots cleared for cultivation mixed in. Then the lower hills, they were different. More bare, really. Covered in bushes, smaller trees.
So, a challenging landscape, definitely.
I no doubt. And not exactly welcoming to outsiders, it seems.
Right, Elphinstone mentioned that, didn't he? Travelers were wary.
They were. And he himself actually found it really difficult to even meet a Waziri outside their own territory.
So his account relies a bit on secondhand information, then?
He acknowledges that, yeah. He says it relies heavily on reports from other travelers, which, might limit how deep it goes in some areas.
Still, even with that caveat, it's a pretty unique source. Okay, so let's talk about their society. What struck me was this lack of central government.
Yeah, that's a key point. No single ruler. Instead, you have these smaller, independent communities.
And how were they run?
It varied. Some seemed to have powerful local chiefs, but others operated more like, democracies, as he put it.
Democracies. Interesting. But then there's this paradox, isn't there?
Exactly. Because despite their reputation later, as plunderers, Elphinstone observed this remarkable peacefulness within their own groups. He didn't see big wars between clans or, much internal fighting at all.
That's really surprising. How do you square that internal peace with their external actions?
It's fascinating. Maybe that internal cohesion was just, necessary for survival there. But yes, it's a huge contrast to how they dealt with outsiders.
Let's get into that. The raiding.
Right. Elphinstone is pretty clear about their notoriety, especially for attacking caravans and migratory tribes.
Those specifically.
Most of the Golar Pass, mainly. And it wasn't minor stuff. He paints a picture of a really dangerous area.
So travelers had to be prepared.
Absolutely. No escorts were sought or granted there. Caravans went heavily armed, expecting serious fights.
And the fighting itself, pretty brutal.
Very. He mentions this grim detail. No quarter given to men in these fights.
None at all.
None. And there was even this belief, he reports, that they would kill any male child they captured.
Wow, that's harsh. But then completely differently, their treatment of women.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. He specifically states women were never molested.
Never.
Never. If a woman got lost or separated, they'd treat her kindly, even give her guides to get back safely.
That is such a stark contrast. It points to some very specific rules, doesn't it?
It really does. Complex social codes. And that complexity extends to their hospitality, too.
Ah, the hospitality. Tell us about that.
It's remarkable. Elphinstone says that even an enemy, if they could somehow reach a Waziri home and claim sanctuary, they'd be treated as a guest. Full stop. All the courtesies, protection, everything.
Even an enemy. So, fierce hostility outside, but this incredibly strong code of conduct inside the home.
Precisely. It really paints a picture of a society with very distinct boundaries and rules for different situations.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How did they live? What were their homes like? Elphinstone mentioned 2 types.
He did. Some Waziris lived in fixed settlements. Think small hamlets, houses made of thatch, maybe with terraces.
Okay, standard enough for the region, maybe.
But then, near Kanagoram, he described something really unusual.
Which was?
Caves. Dwellings cut right into the rock faces. Some were apparently huge, multi-story, even big enough to shelter a camel.
Multi-story caves holding camels. That's quite an image.
Isn't it? But that seems to have been the exception.
So what was the rule?
The majority, he says, lived a more mobile life. In black tents, or maybe temporary huts made of mats or straw.
Moving around?
Up into the higher mountains in the spring, back down to the lower hills for winter, following their animals.
Transhumance. That's seasonal migration.
Exactly that.
What animals were key for them?
Primarily goats, according to Elphinstone. He also notes they bred horses.
Horses. In that terrain.
Yeah, small but sturdy ones, he says. And apparently, they were quite fond of horsemanship, which surprised him a bit too, given the mountains.
Okay. Now, what about the people themselves? What did Elphinstone say they looked like?
He described them as tall, muscular people, fair complexions, high features.
And their clothing.
Very distinctive. A high, sort of conical black cap, a loose gray coat made from black blanket material tied with a girdle.
Like a robe.
Kinda, yeah.
No.
And on their feet, sandals made of straw rope or maybe untanned leather.
And this whole look, Elphinstone thought it gave them a certain appearance.
He did. He said combined with their shaggy hair and beards, and apparently quite hairy limbs, it gave them a wild and terrible appearance. His words.
Wow, a strong impression. It does show how appearance can shape perception, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Now, thinking about their arms, their weaponry,
Yeah,
they sound well equipped.
definitely. He mentions the standard Afghan knife, a shield.
And the matchlock rifle, which they were supposedly very skilled with.
Experts, he called them.
Right. And here's something else interesting. They weren't just using weapons.
Oh.
Elphinstone notes there was local iron ore, and the Waziris actually worked it themselves. They made their own arms.
Really? Craftsmen as well as warriors.
Exactly. They even exported some to the plains.
Yeah.
Shows a level of self-sufficiency, technological skill.
That's impressive. What about their general manners, their character?
He described them as having this rather haughty bearing, loud voices, very distinct, commanding.
Okay, so maybe a bit intimidating up front.
Perhaps. But then he contrasts that. When interacting with guests or amongst themselves, he found them gentle and good-tempered.
Another duality there, haughty but gentle.
It seems to be a recurring theme. And then there's this really striking thing about truthfulness.
Oh yes, the anecdote about the goat.
That's the one. This dispute over a lost coat. If someone claimed it and confirmed it by stroking their beard.
Stroking their beard, like an oath.
Exactly. Apparently, the other person would just accept their word immediately. No more questions asked.
The beard-stroking oath. That's incredible. It speaks volumes about trust within their community, doesn't it?
It really does. A very specific cultural practice.
So what did they do for fun? Any amusements Elphinstone observed?
Well, he noted that they liked listening to songs. Interestingly, he says they didn't sing themselves, just listened.
Okay. Any dancing?
Yes, something called the Pyrrhic dance. Sounds pretty active warlike moves. Flourishing swords, energetic.
And their food, what was their diet like?
Pretty basic, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Meat, sheep, oxen, or camels often eaten half raw.
Half raw.
Yeah. Served with simple, unleavened bread, maybe some roots they gathered. Reflects what the environment provided, I suppose.
Makes sense. Now, a really important aspect, the role of women. What did Elphinstone observe there?
He made a point of saying they weren't required to do manual labor, which is, an interesting social detail.
Definitely. And their dress.
A long, thick shift,
Yeah.
usually red cotton, and similar sandals to the men.
Any adornments?
Oh, yes. They apparently wore as much gold and silver jewelry as their husbands could possibly afford. So wealth was displayed that way.
Okay. And then there's that really unique custom about marriage proposals.
Ah, yes. This is quite something. The women took the lead.
How did that work?
If a woman chose a man, she'd send the camp drummer over to him.
The drummer.
Yes, and the drummer would place her handkerchief, pinned with her hairpin, onto the man's cap. Publicly.
Wow, a very public declaration.
Absolutely. And that act basically obligated the man to marry her, provided he could pay the bride price to her father.
So the choice was hers, but the financial side still rested with the man and her family.
Seems so. But still, a remarkably direct way for women to choose their partners.
No kidding. Okay, so Elphinstone also touches on the neighbors, the Jadrins. Similar to the Waziris, he said.
In some ways, yes. Dress and manners, he thought, were quite similar. Geographically, he puts them west of the Waziris.
Right, bordering places like Karate and Ghuzni.
Exactly. And north of them were the Georges. He noted that down near the Koram River, the Jadrins did some farming inferior grains, he called.
But elsewhere they were different.
More nomadic, yeah. Further towards the Codes region, they herded goats in these dense pine forests.
And there was that comparison made by their neighbor.
Yeah, yes. The Karate people apparently described the Jadrins as being more like mountain bears than men.
Mountain bears, that's evocative.
Isn't it? Paints a picture of maybe an even more rugged, isolated group. Elphinstone himself said they were a smaller tribe, rarely visited.
And they had their own conflicts.
Yeah, clashes with the Codes. And they also had a reputation for raiding travelers, specifically on the Kabul-Bangush Road near the Pay Pass.
And even less likely to be seen outside their hills than the Waziris.
Apparently so. Very much kept to themselves, it seems.
Okay, and Elphinstone just briefly sketches out some other nearby areas too.
Just briefly, yeah. To give context, he mentions the lands west of Takasulaman, places like Hurupal used for pasture by Caucasus tribes, Voon used by shepherds.
Ver or Loom.
Right, Ver as winter pasture, or Loom as the land of Woos, and tracts belonging to Karate and other Gilj clans. Just helps place Waziristan in that wider, early 19th century map.
So putting it all together, Elphinstone gives us this, incredible picture, doesn't he? Waziristan in 1808. Fiercely independent people.
Absolutely. And full of these contrasts we've been talking about.
Yeah, that internal peace versus the external raiding, the brutality and conflict versus the strict codes of hospitality and respect for women.
And those unique customs, the beard oath, the women choosing husbands, all set against this really harsh, isolated mountain backdrop.
It really underscores the value of these old historical accounts, I think.
Oh, definitely. They open a window onto ways of life that are just so different from our own experiences. Let's just think about how societies organize themselves, their values.
How they adapt. It challenges our assumptions, maybe.
Exactly. It shows the sheer diversity of human social structures and what shapes them.
It really makes you think, though, looking back at Elphinstone's account from, over 200 years ago?
Yeah.
How much of that world, those characteristics, might still echo in Waziristan today? What aspects might have endured all this time?
That's the big question, isn't it? Despite all the changes globally.
Right. If you could somehow compare Elphinstone's time directly with today, what continuities would you even see? And what would be utterly transformed? It's definitely something worth pondering.